So our StormLoft Down Topquilt, it's a top quilt that's designed for ground sleepers. It's designed to be an approachable top quilt that is as kind of worry-free as possible. And kind of where those objectives come from is kind of what the advent of the top quilt, its origins, which are in hammock use. Hammock users, realize that it's not very practical to use a sleeping bag inside a hammock, and so the development of a top quilt and an under quilt was really geared towards hammockers. However, like ultralight backpackers quickly realized the weight savings benefit of a top quilt when used just as a ground sleeping bag replacement, or your sleep system while you're inside a tent sleeping on a sleeping pad. There's a very substantial weight savings that can be had with using a top quilt on the ground. And some of the challenges that some people have with doing that is kind of just like, I'd say the biggest issue people have is getting drafts from the sides, coming in from kind of the side and underneath of the top quilt. And what that draft is just kind of maybe a small gap between the edge of the top quilt and the edge of the sleeping pad, or a little bit of open space. And so, I'd say that's probably one of the most common reservations, fears, or complaints about top quilts being used on the ground, is just that, almost that hassle of making sure everything is perfectly tidied up and cinched down and tucked underneath your sides, and it's legitimate. It absolutely happens to a lot of people, and so when we looked at kind of redesigning our old top quilt, that's where we kind of the direction we wanted to go is I think more people are using top quilts than ever before on the ground, in a tent, or not in a tent, but not in a hammock. Lots of surveys conducted over the last few years just show a dramatic rise in top quilt use, and that is also reflected in my use and other people within the company. And so we really wanted to tackle or address that reservation people have, so that we knew we needed to design something, or design the top quilt in a way that would make it more worry-free, and in the end make it a warmer night's sleep for the user. And so we set out to make an approachable, easy to use top quilt that was going to be draft free and designed first to be a ground sleeping top quilt. When you do that, you also are able to have a top quilt that will work just as well in a hammock. But you kind of can't do it backwards. If you design a top quilt to work really well in a hammock, it stands a decent chance that it might not work too well on the ground. So the top quilt uses a sewn-in foot box. We've been really happy with it. Everybody we've talked to, we just decided that's the direction we want to go. We realize that there are some people that necessarily don't like that, but from our understanding, there's more people that prefer a sewn-in foot box. That means that there's no way of opening up the bottom end or the foot box area of the top quilt. And how we ended up addressing the draft issue was by making it wider but also narrower on the same top quilt. A lot of options out there, or one of the common ways that people think to, address the draft issue, let's just call it the draft issue of air, cold air getting in from the sides, is because the top quilt's not wide enough. So the first thought is, well, if we just make the top quilt wider, then it'll tuck underneath us better and that'll stop the draft issue. But the whole point in using a top quilt in the first place is to save weight, and we don't want to sacrifice weight savings just to have a top quilt that doesn't have drafts. So to do that, we made the top quilt wider in the areas that, if you're a side sleeper or you're rolling over inside the top quilt, there's a section of that top quilt where if you make it wider, that will certainly help with the draft issue. It will eliminate the drafts. It will always stay tucked in and underneath to where you're not going to get any drafts. But we also realized that above that area on the body, that would just be a bunch of excess fabric and insulation. And so we basically made the top quilt wider from the, like if you're laying inside the top quilt, say the mid-thigh to the shoulder area, we made it wider. And then from that shoulder-ish area, we had the top quilt, we basically designed it so that it would dramatically taper up towards call it the collar, the top edge of the top quilt that wraps around your neck. So there's a dramatic taper from an area about like that tall, 18 inches or so. And what that does is it eliminates all that excess material, because in the end, if you didn't do that, we would just have to just cinch it up even more to prevent this huge open hole at the top of the top quilt. So we didn't want that extra material. That saved us a bunch of weight. But what that actually also accomplishes is, as that tapered area of the top quilt gets wrapped around the upper shoulder and the neck area, just because of the geometry of it, it automatically kind of gently forces the lower area of the top quilt to have a predisposition to start tucking itself under your shoulders and your torso. It's just an issue of the geometry and the tension that's created when that tapered area gets wrapped behind your neck and then closed. It just automatically kind of starts wrapping itself around the back side of the user's shoulders and torso, which really helps with the draft issue. So it's this synergistic kind of pairing of design features, or kind of the one design feature kind of accomplishes two things really well, while not adding any weight to the top quilt. So that's probably the most substantial design attribute or design feature of the top quilt. Now we did add there's a draft collar, a 3-inch boxed baffle draft collar at the top that is not cinched down. So the cinch cord that tightens up the neck area of the top quilt around you, it sits downward from this draft tube or draft collar, so that when you cinch it up, it keeps all that loft. And that just helps with heat retention, preventing your body heat from escaping out the top, since you don't have a hood. So those are kind of the main features. We also addressed the foot box issue. That's probably one of the more common issues with top quilts, and sleeping bags for that matter, is cold feet, and finding that balance of how much room we have in the foot box versus how little room you put in there. If there's too much room, that's just a bunch of empty space that, one, is material, which weighs something, but that's also space that your body has to keep warm, and if it can't keep it warm, then it will be colder, it will be cooler. So if a foot box is too big, the user's feet will probably end up being a little bit cold just because they can't keep that area inside warm enough. So we kind of trimmed up the foot box a little bit to make it as efficient as possible while not being restrictive. And one of the things we did was, if you were to look at the bottom end of the foot box, kind of like if these are my feet, they're sticking up towards the sky, this area of the foot box, we basically made a trapezoidal shape, and that is because if a user is laying on their back, your feet naturally tend to splay out like that. They want to go to rest at this position. So that's that trapezoid shape of the bottom foot box. And that's just for efficiency of space and material. So it enables us to have less excess space to keep warm down there, but it also makes sure that there's enough room without being too heavy. We're not using excessive down or fabric. So those are kind of the main features. There's two sets of pad strap clips that are placed at different areas of where the user's torso would be, and those are included with pad straps. The pad straps are adjustable for width, how close together they get. And we also, because of how we made that kind of midsection of the top quilt wider, it actually enables a lot of people to be able to just completely buckle the lower set of pad strap buckles, just buckle it completely shut and still have plenty of room to roll around. But that's kind of a nice thing. And if we were to do that on our old top quilt or a top quilt that is not that wide in the midsection, it would be like really, really tight in that area of the torso and very uncomfortable. But it's actually something that is pretty handy at times. The top quilt uses a 10 denier fabric inside and out. It's a downproof fabric. It's got a DWR treatment on the outside to just give it a little bit of water resistance, which is helpful. The insulation is 800 fill power down, and we use hyper-dried down, which is a wax-based water-resistant down treatment that has really good longevity without the use of PFCs, and it just performs really well. And that kind of comes back to our field testing, where we field tested these in some really moist environments, and frankly with a lot of exposure to blowing rain and lots of condensation that resulted from the weather conditions in some of our trips. But being able to get up in the morning and maybe shake the top quilt off inside a damp tent and then stuff it in a stuff sack and hike for 10 to 12 hours in a day, and then get it out at the end of that day and lay it out and get in that top quilt and be just as warm as the night before in freezing temperatures. So that's that down we have a lot of confidence in, and that's kind of the two key materials of the top quilt is the nylon fabric and the down insulation. Kind of talked about the design concept and what we wanted to accomplish. With a sleeping bag, it's really tough because there's different body sizes, widths, body lengths, and side sleepers, stomach sleepers, back sleepers. And so accomplishing those objectives with all those different types of bodies and sleepers, it's tough. And we went through many prototypes where we were, changing the point of taper, whether that's at the bottom of the torso section or the top of the torso section, because we'd find that if the point of taper was too low or too high, it would do funny things and it wouldn't be comfortable for some people. changing things like the internal structure of the baffles that create the chambers that the down is filled into, to make sure that we had, a differential cut, which means that when the person is inside the sleeping bag and their body creates pressure against the inside of the bag, that it doesn't smash or put too much pressure that it collapses the down from the inside out, which means that that area of the quilt is no longer going to keep the person warm. Again, like dialing in just some of the measurements and angles of things. We went through a lot of prototypes, probably more than a dozen, just kind of incremental tweaks here and there. We believe in fine tuning things as much as possible. We want to just make sure that that it really does what we set out to do. And again, that comes back to getting them in the field and just spending lots of nights in them with different people in them. So over a year of field testing went into this for sure, and there'd be a change that would come from most of these trips. We do a trip and then make a change, do another trip, make a change, but and this is year round. So we weren't taking time off in the winter to stay warmer in a sleeping bag. Like, this is year round where we're really proving this out. So that's kind of the design process, and lots of tweaking, lots of field testing, and just back and forth until we had some pretty substantial trips that we felt gave the Topquilt a really good test for, if it did keep drafts out for multiple people that are different body shapes and sizes and different environmental conditions, and when we got all the positive feedback, that's how we know it's ready, and it's how we knew it was ready at the time. So that's kind of how it goes. Well, top quilts they're just so weight efficient. You just get so much weight savings by using a top quilt, and they actually I feel like they're more comfortable to sleep in terms of just being able to roll around and just know that the top quilt's going to stay put. And then aside from general top quilt use, our StormLoft our StormLoft top quilt, it just is easy to use in terms of clipping it onto pad straps and not worrying about drafts, and that kind of that inclination it has, or that predisposition it has to just start tucking itself around and underneath you as soon as you snap the collar around your neck. I just think it makes it so easy to use, and it's just a piece that it's a piece of gear that it's a staple item for me that I have a high level of confidence in really austere conditions. And so it's just kind of got like a bit of a psychological position in my subconscious now, whereas I think it probably helps me sleep better, just because when I get in it, I know what I've slept through. And so I think that's kind of like what the StormLoft quilt has to offer.